The clock read 3:17 p.m. on that stifling Friday afternoon in Atlanta. The bank's air conditioning struggled to cool the room, thick with restless bodies. Long lines dragged on under the impatient stares of customers who seemed closer to boiling over with each passing minute. Amid murmurs and sighs, the tapping of keyboards echoed in a monotonous rhythm, blending with the occasional creak of the automatic doors. At the center of this scene of banality, Angela Myers, a black woman with a calm demeanor and watchful eyes, stood firmly in her place in line, clutching a brown envelope tightly against her chest. She was simply dressed, a white shirt, dark jeans, and modest shoes. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, revealing strong, commanding features. Yet at that moment she drew no attention to herself. Until the unexpected happened. A few feet away, a white police officer, his uniform wrinkled and his face stern, was watching her. His name was Officer Derek Shaw. He stared at her like a man seeing danger where there was none. His narrowed eyes betrayed the prejudice simmering silently within him. As Angela stepped up to the ATM, inserting her card and beginning to enter her PIN, Derek approached. Without warning, without explanation, without even an attempt at dialogue, he drew his service weapon and aimed it directly at her. "Step away from the machine. Now." His voice sliced through the bank's stillness like a sharpened blade. The sound of the gun being drawn echoed off the walls, pulling screams and sudden movements from the line. Some people dove to the floor. Others stood frozen, staring at the scene with wide, disbelieving eyes. A security guard inside the bank hesitated, confused and afraid to intervene. Angela raised her hands slowly, stepping away from the machine with careful, deliberate movements. Her face showed no obvious fear, but inside, her heart pounded against her chest like a war drum. "Show me your hands. What's that in your hands?" The officer barked, advancing with his finger already tight on the trigger. The brown envelope slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor with a dull thud. From it spilled a few bills, clearly visible. Money, just money. No weapon, no threat, nothing to justify such a brutal assault. Even faced with the evidence, Derek didn't back down. His face flushed red with rage, as if the mere presence of this woman, in this space, was an intolerable offense. The eyes of everyone present darted between Angela and Derek. No one dared move, as if the slightest twitch could spark a tragedy. Time seemed frozen, the air thin. Angela then broke the silence. "I'm following your orders," she said, her voice firm but measured. The words hung heavy in the air. It was as if she knew something the others had yet to realize. A faint gleam in her eyes revealed that she was no ordinary, helpless victim. Perhaps unsettled by her composure, the officer stepped closer. That was when Angela's hand, almost imperceptibly, slid along her side, touching a small device hidden under her shirt. What she was about to do would change everything. The crowd watched, barely breathing. In a matter of seconds, Angela would show the world who she truly was, and why she should never have been underestimated. The scene darkens for a moment, as if the world itself, in that crucial second, were taking a deep breath before changing forever. The image of Angela, hands raised under the barrel of the gun, slowly blurs. The camera dives into her eyes, transporting us to another time. A time when she didn't yet have to defend herself against weapons, only against a world that had always judged her as lesser. Decades earlier, in Atlanta's Vine City neighborhood, Angela was just a little girl with wide eyes and even wider dreams. She grew up in a modest wooden house where the thin walls barely muffled the sounds of nighttime sirens and the desperate cries that seemed part of the landscape. Her mother, Lorraine, worked 2 shifts as a cleaner while her father, Marcus, scraped by with odd construction jobs. Despite the hardships, the house overflowed with love. Every night, Lorraine would sit by her daughter's side, reading aloud from books borrowed from the public library. Fascinated by stories of black women defying the impossible, Angela grew up believing that knowledge was the most powerful weapon she could ever wield. But the world outside was less kind. At school, Angela learned early what it meant to be invisible. Teachers ignored her, classmates ridiculed her, and an entire system subtly told her she would never be enough. She heard them, but she refused to believe them. At 16, while many of her friends lost themselves to the streets, Angela studied by candlelight, determined to carve a path no one could take from her. She placed first in the community police entrance exam, breaking records and defying expectations. But her fight was only beginning. As a black woman, in the force, every promotion was a battle, every achievement, a challenge thrown in the face of those who believed her place was to stay silent. Over the years, Angela became a specialist in tactical security operations, trained not just to protect, but to lead, though she was often still treated as an outsider in rooms dominated by white men. Still, she never bowed her head. Those closest to her described her as a rock, unshakable, ethical, relentless against injustice. Yet within her, there was also a quiet tenderness, a deep desire to prove day after day that her worth was not defined by the color of her skin, but by the greatness of her character. Now back in the present, in that tense afternoon at the bank, Angela carried more than just a brown envelope full of cash. She carried every lesson learned under the weight of prejudice. She carried every hidden tear. She carried the memory of her mother, who taught her that dignity wasn't a favor, it was a right. She knew exactly who she was. And more importantly, she knew the man before her had no idea. With a movement so subtle it was almost invisible, her finger pressed a small button on the radio hidden under her shirt, a special frequency reserved for high-priority emergency operations. In less than 2 minutes, backup would arrive. But what none of the bystanders could have anticipated was how, with a single word into that microphone, Angela would flip the entire scene of oppression upside down, exposing a rotten system and a courage powerful enough to change destinies. The clock's second hand seemed to move in slow motion. The tension inside the bank made the air nearly impossible to breathe. Angela, the radio already discreetly activated, remained motionless, her hands still raised, the scattered bills at her feet a silent testament to her innocence. Officer Derek Shaw, however, only escalated his brutality. "Get on the ground. Get down now," he barked, his voice heavy with disproportionate rage and a sense of unearned authority. Some customers tried to intervene with pleading looks, but no one dared to speak. Fear of becoming the next target held them captive in their own helplessness. With her usual calm, Angela slowly lowered herself to her knees. Her eyes never left Derek's even as her legs touched the cold, filthy floor. She knew every move she made would be twisted into a threat. She knew that, to him, her very existence was provocation. And that's exactly what he wanted, to break her. He stepped closer, the barrel of his gun now just inches from her head. The humiliation was public, cruel, and deliberate, as if forcing her into submission could somehow reaffirm his false sense of superiority. "Where'd you get that money, huh?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can just walk in here and do whatever you want?" Angela stayed silent. She knew any word spoken now could be used against her. She had learned, through a lifetime of experience, that sometimes silence spoke louder than any defense. The officer kicked the envelope, scattering the bills further across the floor. His eyes roamed over Angela, not searching for danger, but for a reason to legitimize his suspicion. And in his poisoned mind, her skin color was evidence enough. The next minutes played out like a bitter choreography of abuse. Derek grabbed Angela's wrists violently, cuffing her right there in front of everyone. His movements were rough, needlessly aggressive. "You're under arrest for suspicion of fraud and resisting authority," he declared, as if his words alone were law, as if the silent screams of injustice weren't echoing through the room. The crowd watched, horrified, but frozen in place. It was a scene from a tragedy as old as the country itself, rooted deep in the fabric of a society that had so often chosen to look the other way. Angela felt the cold metal of the cuffs tighten against her skin, but her mind remained razor sharp. Every second was calculated. Every heartbeat, a countdown. Inside her shirt, the small red light on her hidden radio blinked. The signal had been sent. Somewhere beyond the bank's doors, backup was already on the move. Derek, blinded by arrogance, didn't even notice that the reality he thought he controlled was slipping through his fingers. He yanked Angela up roughly. The silence in the bank was almost reverent, as if everyone were waiting for something. As if the universe itself was holding its breath. Angela allowed herself a faint smile, barely noticeable, as she felt the subtle tremor beneath her feet. A familiar, unmistakable sound. Tactical boots approaching. "You made a very big mistake today," she said, her voice low but firm. Derek frowned, confused, not understanding, still clinging to the belief that he was the one in control. In the next few seconds, the bank doors would burst open, and Derek would find out, in the harshest way possible, that the woman he tried to humiliate carried a truth far greater than he could ever comprehend. The metallic clink of handcuffs still echoed through the bank's silent hall when the front door was suddenly thrown open. The loud crash reverberated like thunder, drawing every pair of eyes toward the entrance. 4 tactical officers, fully uniformed, flooded the lobby with an imposing presence. Their bulletproof vests bore the golden emblem of the Atlanta Police Department, but what truly froze Derek Shaw in place was the figure leading them. It was Lieutenant Charles Boone, head of Special Operations, a man known for his strictness and unshakable integrity. With firm steps, Boone crossed the distance to Derek and Angela, his eyes locked onto the scene before him. The drawn weapon, the black woman in handcuffs, the scattered bills on the floor, a tragic testament to a grotesque mistake. The crowded bank became a silent courtroom. "Officer Derek Shaw," Boone said sharply, "lower your weapon and step away from the detainee. Now." Derek hesitated. His mind, clouded with confusion and humiliation, scrambled to find some justification for his actions. But the crushing weight of the stairs around him left no room for excuses. With trembling hands, he obeyed. Angela straightened, her wrists still bound, but her eyes gleamed with a strength that defied every ounce of violence inflicted upon her. Boone turned to her with a respectful nod. "Special Agent Myers," he said, his voice firm but deferential. "Everything is under control now. You can relax." The murmurs that rippled through the bank were like a shockwave. Angela Myers wasn't an ordinary civilian. She was a special agent working undercover on a major bank fraud investigation, one of the division's top operatives. She hadn't just been a customer, she had been on official duty. Derek, his face burning with shame, stumbled back a step, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. An agent?" he stammered, the word catching painfully in his throat. Boone didn't smile. His face remained a mask of stern authority. "Yes, an agent," he said, stepping closer. "A high-ranking one. And you are now being detained on suspicion of misconduct, abuse of power, and racial discrimination." 2 of the officers moved in, swiftly cuffing Derek while he still struggled to grasp the gravity of what had just unfolded. Angela stood tall, her dignity untouched, even after the public humiliation. As Derek was led away, he passed by the customers who only minutes ago had stood by in silence. Their eyes now carried judgment, condemnation. Every glance a silent verdict against him. Angela was unshackled carefully. Boone handed her the crumpled envelope and murmured, "I'm sorry. This should have never happened." She nodded, but deep inside she knew. Though the apology was sincere, it could not erase the wound carved by years of invisible assaults, by the countless times she had been treated as suspicious simply for existing. As she gathered the last of the bills from the floor, she lifted her head and looked around. She saw faces marked by shame, solidarity, reflection. It was as if, in that brief moment, They had been forced to confront a truth they had long preferred to ignore. Derek Shaw, now cuffed, passed by without daring to meet her gaze. Angela knew that what had happened today was only another chapter in a much larger battle. But she also knew that sometimes the courage of a single person was enough to make the world stop and listen. And as the officers escorted Derek out of the bank, Angela steeled herself for the next fight, not just holding one man accountable, but taking on an entire system that, day after day, insisted on seeing her skin color before her worth. The afternoon sun, filtered through the bank's wide windows, cast golden beams across the cold floor, now a silent witness to everything that had unfolded. The chaos slowly faded. Customers left quietly, heads bowed, as if carrying a weight of shame that wasn't theirs, yet clung to them all the same. Angela stayed a few moments longer. Her eyes swept across the space like someone surveying an invisible battlefield. The distant wail of sirens blended with the low hum of a city moving on, indifferent to what had just happened, as it had always been. A bank manager approached hesitantly, his face a mixture of embarrassment and regret. "Ma'am, I'm sorry I didn't do anything," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Angela looked at him for a long moment. She could have answered in so many ways. She could have unleashed all the bottled-up indignation, could have shamed him, could have made the weight of his complicity ring out through the room. But she simply said, "Silence is a choice too." The man dropped his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. Angela walked out of the bank with steady steps, the envelope clutched tightly in her hands. Outside, the world spun on as if nothing had happened. Cars, honked people hurried past. Stores opened and closed their doors, as if injustice ended at the walls where it was committed. But she knew the truth. She knew that every invisible scar carried by bodies like hers was a permanent mark of the constant fight for dignity. On her way to the car, memories washed over her in waves. She remembered her childhood in Vine City. She remembered the sleepless nights spent studying to be better than anyone expected. She remembered every sidelong glance, every promotion questioned, every room where she was the only woman, the only black person, the only dissenting voice. And now, even after all she had achieved, she was still forced to prove her worth, hands raised, under the barrel of a gun. Reality was cruel in its consistency. In the back seat of her car, she found the badge she always kept with her, tucked away as a reminder of her mission. She held it between her fingers and closed her eyes for a moment. "Don't just fight for yourself," her mother had once told her. "Fight for those who still can't raise their voice." And that was exactly what she would do. Angela knew Derek Shaw's arrest would only be the beginning. She knew internal investigations would be launched, headlines would be written, heated debates would flare across social media and around coffee tables. But she also knew real change required more than momentary outrage. It demanded daily courage. Courage to confront systems that pretend neutrality while perpetuating inequality. Courage to turn indignation into action. Courage to exist fully every day without apologizing for who you are. She started the car and pulled away. The bank faded into the distance, but the fight stayed with her. As she drove through the busy streets of Atlanta, a question echoed in her mind, resonating like a call. How many more times will we have to prove we deserve the same respect as any other human being? The future would depend on the answer. If this story moved you, share it. Don't stay silent in the face of injustice. Your silence, too, is a choice.